Good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. And we're looking at Jesus' prediction in Matthew chapter 24, verse 15 and following of the Great Tribulation. Now, obviously, the precursor to that, the fountain from which the Great Tribulation would flow, is the Abomination of Desolation. It needs to be pointed out. And this, this is quite a critical point, and it's one that I do not see fully developed in an awful lot of the literature. I see some scholars, such as Brent Petrie, that I mentioned in yesterday's video, who touch on it a little bit, but they do not develop it in a way that I believe helps us to understand it even more, and with greater clarity, perhaps, at least in the framework of it. Jesus said, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, let the one who reads understand, then let those who are in Judea flee. The terminology, the abomination of desolation, literally means, and by the way, it's taken from Daniel chapter 9, Daniel 11, Daniel chapter 12, just as Jesus said, just as Jesus predicted that Daniel would be fulfilled. But it is literally not simply the abomination of desolation, but it is more literally the abomination that brings desolation, that causes desolation. Now, that really ought to cause us to think. The abomination of desolation would stand in the holy place. Well, what is the holy place? That's a sticky question, isn't it? You see, for the Jews, there were 10 concentric circles of holiness. There was the broad circle of the earth, as it were, the entire earth. There was the land of Israel. There was the city of Jerusalem, and on and on. You see, they kept bringing the circles down, bringing them down, until the most holy place in all of the world was the most holy place of the temple in Jerusalem. By the way, that's why Ezekiel chapter 5, verse 5 and following said, you have set Jerusalem in the midst of the nations. They viewed Jerusalem as the very center of the world. Theologically, it was the center of the world. So, when we look at this terminology, the abomination that causes desolation, there are a couple of things that should jump out at us almost immediately. Point number one, Jesus was speaking to his living, breathing apostles as they sat on the Mount of Olives. And he said, when you see the abomination of desolation, when you see, there could not be a clearer first century application of the Great Tribulation and the abomination of desolation anywhere. Are we going to honor audience relevance or not? Now, here's what generally happens. My dispensational friends say, well, Jesus is talking collectively and timelessly. He's simply talking about when the Jews, at whatever time that might be, and they go back to Deuteronomy. And they say, well, see, here Moses speaks of you seeing this or you seeing that, for instance, in the Song of Moses. Deuteronomy chapter 32, which would not happen for many generations removed from Moses' day. Well, that's a misapplication. How do I know? Because Moses emphatically tells them that although he's using the personal pronoun you as the collective people, he emphatically tells them it's for many generations to come, and it's for the last days, and it would be after he died, Deuteronomy 31:29. Again, in Israel's last days, and they were not living in Israel's last days. And so here, the reason that we know that you does not apply to that specific generation is because we're told it doesn't. Moses did not say, you will see these things. He said, after many generations to come. Deuteronomy 32:5 and following. And once again, he said, after my death. It wasn't their day. So the word you there, the personal pronoun you, was not being used in a very personal, temporary sense. But in Matthew chapter 24, there is absolutely no indication whatsoever that he is not using the you in a very personal, very temporal, very contemporary sense. You will see the abomination of desolation. Now, folks, this really honestly is it's critically important. Notice that Jesus said, you will see the abomination of desolation, then get out of town. We know from Eusebius, 4th century church historian, that because of a commandment of the Lord, the church fled Jerusalem. I wonder what that commandment might have been. I wonder why it's not Matthew chapter 24 and verse 15. What's the evidence that it is not Matthew chapter 24 and verse 15? Now, if that's true, if the first century church fled Jerusalem, then we ask the question, why did they flee? And the obvious answer is they had seen the abomination of desolation, the abomination that causes desolation. Now look, the relationship between the abomination of desolation and the man of sin is very powerful. It has been said that there are over 50 different interpretations of the man of sin / the abomination of desolation. We are told by our dispensational friends that some point of time in the future, the man of sin will erect the Jerusalem temple and allow the Jews to worship there for 3.5 years. But after 3.5 years, he will demand to set up his own statue in the temple, the abomination of desolation. They will refuse, and the great tribulation will ensue. Well, number one, that violates the you will see. It violates the audience relevance. Secondly, by the way, it makes the man of sin and the abomination of desolation to be something separate and apart from Israel's sin. Now look, here's what I'm trying to say. The abomination that causes desolation would not, on the very surface of it, would not be some heinous crime by a pagan nation in the holy place. No. Here's the reason why. The only time that God allowed pagans to invade the land of Israel, to take the temple, to stand in the holy place, was when Israel had committed abominations. In other words, the pagans were not the ones committing abominations. Now, yes, I understand. I'm well aware of the fact that the Maccabees, the book of Maccabees, says that when Antiochus Epiphanes had a pig slaughtered on the altar, that was the abomination of desolation. Well, I have a difficulty with that. Antiochus Epiphanes was not a Jew, and the only reason that pagan horrible sacrifice was allowed to be offered on the altar of the temple at Jerusalem was because Israel at that time, according to Daniel chapter 8, and even according to Daniel chapter 11, Israel had become sinful. They were in apostasy. And thus God allowed that pagan sacrilege. But prior to that pagan sacrilege was Israel's sin. So again, my point is that the abomination of desolation would be something done by Israel, God's covenant people, that as a result of their sin would bring about the Great Tribulation, would bring about the pagan invasion, the pagan destruction of Jerusalem. I believe that when we look at the terminology, the abomination that brings or that causes desolation, we have to look at the term abomination. And most of the time in the Old Covenant, like 99.9% of the time, that abomination was some form of idolatry committed by Israel. It was some sin committed by Israel. Now, they might have borrowed it from the pagan nations. They most assuredly did that. But it was Israel committing abomination that brought about her judgment at the hands of the pagans. Now, you know what that means? That means that the dispensational paradigm is completely false. They have a pagan, non-Jew as the man of sin. At least most of them do. Some of them actually believe it's a Jewish man that rises to the prominence as the man of sin. But those who take the view that it's a pagan, non-Israelite, non-Jew who commits the abomination that brings desolation, I believe are in violation of the word abomination, because it's the sin that would lead to the desolation. And that is an incredibly powerful and important point. Now look, I discuss this and a whole lot more in my book, The Resurrection of Daniel chapter 12 verse 2, Fulfilled or Future. And I have a great discussion of the abomination of desolation, the abomination that causes desolation. Go to my website, and remember, this month's special, regular price $23.95 plus $4.95 shipping. This month, September 2019, I can't do this for overseas orders. Contact me for a PDF at a greatly reduced price. But this month's special, $19.95, delivered to your door. Okay? So go to my website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com, and order the book, The Resurrection of Daniel, chapter 12, verse 2, Fulfilled or Future. You'll be absolutely greatly pleased that you did. And we've got more on the Great Tribulation. So I'll see you on the flip side.